Probably the issue that comes is, am I being too nice? And then it's all a verbal conversation. Like you might be walking through the hallway doing a repair, and this has happened to me several times. A tenant will come out and meet me in the hallway and say, hey, can I have a new ceiling fan? Or hey, can I paint my bedroom? Or whatever it might be. Can I have a new stove? Can I have a new refrigerator? And you're always kind of stuck on the spot if it's verbal. So what I'm going to say is have it in writing. Okay, now how do you do that if you're walking through the hallway and a tenant just asks you out of the blue? Hey, what's up, all of my real estate peeps? This is Brian Lucier with another episode of the Why Not Real Estate Podcast Golden Nugget, where we will take a tip, tactic, or technique and unpack it that you can now use it in your real estate investment toolbox to better enhance your performance and your bottom line. Well, today I'm going to answer a question. I was actually in Home Depot a couple of weeks ago, and a gentleman walked up to me, Brandon Bunoconti. Yes, Brandon Bunoconti. This is an answer to your question. I was a little taken back. He saw me in the store. I was going through my phone, and he said, hey, you dude, you're the guy on the podcast. And it was like, this has never happened. So thank you, Brandon. But your question was, am I being too nice? And I asked him, what were you talking about? And he says he owns a couple properties and I want to get him on the show. But he was saying, is he being too nice to his tenants, his concessions and stuff like that? So I told him in the store, it's like, look, I'll do a yellow podcast, especially for you to answer the question, am I being too nice? And address how you might be able to navigate this situation. So probably the issue that comes is, am I being too nice? And then it's all a verbal conversation. Like you might be walking through the hallway doing a repair, and this has happened to me several times. A tenant will come out and meet me in the hallway and say, hey, can I have a new ceiling fan? Or hey, can I paint my bedroom? Or whatever it might be. Can I have a new stove? Can I have a new refrigerator? And you're always kind of stuck on the spot if it's verbal. So what I'm going to say is have it in writing. Okay, now how do you do that if you're walking through the hallway and a tenant just asks you out of the blue? So one of the things that has happened, and I've had an attorney advise me on this, is don't let your tenants do repairs at the building. And, it seems innocent, right? They want to paint or they want to do X, Y, Z. So what are some of the landmines you might step on? Snow removal, okay? You shouldn't let a tenant do snow removal because sanitary code says it's the landlord's responsibility, with the exception if it's a single family house. Then you can put the snow removal onto the tenant. But if it's a multifamily with shared egresses, I would not be letting that tenant doing the snow removal. Landscaping. Last thing I want is for a tenant to be out in the yard with a lawnmower. I don't want to make that their responsibility. They could get hurt and that could be a problem. Repairs, of course, unless they have a license or if something needs a permit, I would just say, no, we can't do that. Compensation. This is a big one. How do you compensate a tenant if they're going to do repairs? So you might think that a repair is worth $100. The tenant may think it's worth $500. Now you have a rift. You have a disgruntled tenant who doesn't feel they were treated fairly, and you may have just ruined the relationship moving forward. Now, the bigger issue is workman's comp. For any of the above things that I just mentioned, even if he's painting, right? If he's on a 6-foot ladder, if the paint falls over and ruins a hardwood floor, who covers that? They're not going to have insurance to cover that. Or even worse, if they fall off the ladder stretching to do the trim and they break their arm, you could be liable as the landlord. So you really need to navigate this carefully. And if you do, let's say that your tenant is a painter, okay, and they do this professionally and they want to paint their room, great. I would move forward optimistically cautious, but absolutely have a written rental, not rental, but a written agreement contract stating exactly what the job is, compensation, rate, everything, just like you were going to sub this out to somebody else. And make sure that they have workman's comp, and that if they are a painter, plumber, or electrician living in your building, that they're going to pull the required permits to do this. I know it sounds a little overboard, but the last thing you want is to be on the hook if a tenant hurts themselves if you authorize the repair. So you want a written agreement if you are going to allow a tenant to do a repair or something like that. Now let's backtrack all the way to the lease when they moved in. You should have clauses in your lease regarding modifications to the rental, okay, the unit. These would include painting, do-it-yourself repairs, patching and painting. Like for instance, we have a clause in our rental agreement that if a tenant wants to mount and hang a TV mount for their flat screen TV, that it's a minimum $100 repair when they take it down, because we're going to have to go in and patch and paint, sand, drywall, all of that. So minimum is $100. So that's written into the rental agreement. Before the tenant even asks if they can hang their TV mount, we make it clear to them, hey, you can do this, but it's going to be $100 per TV. Okay, not just $100 and then they hang 5 TVs. So you definitely want to have that outlined in the rental agreement, and you want to have it in writing. So here we are back in that hallway. The tenant comes out and they ask, can I do XYZ? Make it all about the written agreement, saying, well, you know, we would love to do that. You're a great tenant. However, here are the hurdles that we need to get over if we're going to be able to do that. So ask really good questions. You don't want to say, hey, why do you want a ceiling fan? They may just want a ceiling fan. And, you know, it's a minimal investment. You could get a nice ceiling fan for 40, 50, maybe 60 bucks. If it's a really great tenant, you can spend as much as $70 to keep them happy, and they're going to pay that rent every month for the next 12 months for the year. So what can you do? I would say ask really good questions. They want to paint their bedroom. Okay, well, how would we do that? All your furniture's in there. And you want to ask really, really, really good questions. And I'm going to reference 2 books right now. One is Chris Voigt, I think it's Voigt, Never Split the Difference. And then the other is Getting to Yes, which Chris references in his book a lot. And these are books on negotiation and tactics. And if you're not really sure what to say, instead of coming out and saying, well, I think it should be this, just ask the tenant, well, what do you think it should be? And then listen, and then respond back and say, okay, I hear you correctly. This is what you think it should be. How could we make that happen? Okay, this is what you think it should be, and how could we make that happen? Obviously, there's going to be a cost involved with that. How much do you think installing a ceiling fan or painting the bedroom would be worth? Now, the next question is, how are we going to pay for that? Is that something you would be willing, if we would do that for you now, would you be willing in advance on the renewal of your lease to agree to an increase of XYZ, say it's $300 to do whatever it is? If we divided that up for the year, would you be willing to a $25 rental increase on your renewal over what your renewal was supposed to be? Your renewal was supposed to be $50. This would be an extra $25. Would you be willing, if we could paint the room for you now, to sign an agreement for next year's lease that you'd pay an extra $75? We'll get you what you want, but we need to cover that cost in next year's lease. is that something you'd be willing to do? And just make it about asking the good questions to understand why the tenant wants this. It could be very well reasonable. I was at a landlord association meeting, and Andrew Freed, which I give all the props, this was a really good idea. But when he buys a new property, he'll go in with his crew and they'll do one room at a time. If the tenant wants new carpets or a new paint job or whatever, he'll coordinate with the tenant and with his maintenance crew to do what the tenant has requested. Obviously, if the rent was $800 and it's supposed to be $600 or $1,600, he's going to negotiate that all up front, saying, okay, you want 5 rooms painted, you want new carpets, you want new flooring, great, we'll do all that. But after that's all done, your rent is going to go from $800 up to $1,600. Are you willing to do that? And then he'll schedule his crews and make it all happen. Andrew was really smart on that one. He really good because it builds that rapport and relationship with the tenant. They're going to get what they want. Obviously, they're getting a new rental because everything's going to be upgraded. And he makes it about the tenant, and he makes it about improving the property. So now when he goes to refinance, he's getting higher rent and everything. Everyone's going to win in this. So before you just say, no, I'm not going to do a ceiling fan, or no, I can't afford it, think it through, okay? Are you being too nice? Maybe. If you're shooting from the hip like the Lone Ranger and you're just saying, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that for you, but you're not considering all the other things, you might get in there, a simple half-hour install for a ceiling fan, but now you figure out that you have to move all the furniture and, you got to be really careful because of this and that. So, you want to ask the question and make sure everyone's on the same page going in. And again, I'll reference those 2 books. One is Getting to Yes, which Chris Voigt references to all the time in his book, Never Split the Difference. So, are you being too nice? Maybe. Ask good questions, make sure you understand, and as long as everything is up and on board, and again, this goes all the way back to your lease agreement, your repairs and maintenance and schedules, and all that should be written down beforehand. So you shouldn't be getting stopped by that tenant in the hallway asking for a new paint job, but these things are going to happen. So how are you going to deal with it? Ask really good questions, get it in writing. At the end, you want to have a happy tenant because happy tenants pay rent. So I hope that was helpful. Again, Brandon Bunaconti, this one went out for you. This was a question you asked at the Home Depot, and I hope this helps in your operations. So this is Brian Lucier from the Why Not Real Estate Podcast, Golden Nugget, signing off, and we'll see you on the next one.